first question, la première question, is from Raymond Filion, TVA. Please go ahead, your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Merci. Bonjour, M. O'Toole. Je comprends que vous avez amendé le texte de votre motion. Là, vous ne voulez pas d'élection, mais n'empêche que le gouvernement a déjà menacé d'en faire une question de confiance. Alors, est-ce que vous êtes prêt à aller jusqu'en élection s'il le faut pour faire adopter votre motion?
Cette motion, c'est une question de responsabilité et pas d'une élection. On a des questions raisonnables après la pandémie et après le scandale, oui. Et on va travailler avec les autres partis pour poser des questions spécifiques sur ce scandale. Et ce n'est pas une question pour une élection, mais pour la responsabilité.
Je comprends que vous n'en faites pas une question d'élection, mais le gouvernement, lui, dit qu'il va en faire une question de confiance. Alors, le cas échéant, allez-vous quand même insister pour que ça passe, quitte à provoquer des élections?
C'est dommage qu'après une pandémie, après une prorogation, après M. Monod, il a démissionné, après les délais au comité, on a des questions raisonnables. Ce n'est pas notre priorité d'avoir une élection, mais les Canadiens ont besoin des réponses. Les Canadiens ont besoin de la vérité. Et c'est pourquoi on a cette motion aujourd'hui.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Daniel Leblanc, Radio-Canada. Please go ahead, your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole. Petite question, juste un petit changement de sujet sur la question de la nomination des juges par le gouvernement Trudeau. Est-ce que premièrement, est-ce que vous êtes d'accord que le processus actuel est ouvert et transparent et qu'est-ce que vous aimeriez voir comme mesure suite aux révélations ce matin?
Merci, Daniel. Ce matin, j'ai entendu les nouvelles et c'est troublant. On va poser quelques questions aujourd'hui sur cet enjeu et c'est juste comme le scandale, oui. Le gouvernement Trudeau a une approche avec des règles pour les amis libéraux et des règles pour tous les autres Canadiens. C'est inapproprié et on va poser les questions.
Est-ce que vous aimeriez voir une enquête parlementaire, par exemple, au Sénat, et ça a été soulevé par certains membres de votre caucus?
Je vais parler aujourd'hui avec mon cabinet fantôme et particulièrement notre porte-parole pour la justice. Probablement, on va examiner au comité.
Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. Please go ahead, your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Oui, bonjour, M. O'Toole. Je comprends que vous allez amender le texte de la motion qu'on avait déjà sous la main pour préciser qu'on ne devrait pas aller en élection à cause de ça, mais est-ce que vous êtes prêt à d'autres amendements, par exemple, qui pourraient venir des néo-démocrates ou du Bloc québécois, pardon?
Merci, Mélanie. Nous sommes en train de parler avec les autres partis sur cette motion avant le débat aujourd'hui. Particulièrement, tous les partis ont des questions sur le scandale, oui. Il y a beaucoup de questions d'éthique, de la langue nationale, de dépenses du gouvernement, des questions sur la situation avec M. Marneau et la famille de M. Trudeau. Donc, on va travailler en étroite collaboration avec le Bloc et l'NDP pour le débat aujourd'hui.
Allez-vous...
Oui, excusez-moi. We will work with the opposition parties on a variety of questions that many people have on everything from ethics to official languages to lobbying to questions around Mr. Morneau's resignation, the situation with Mr. Trudeau and speaker fees. So we hope to show that this is about accountability and not about an election.
Puis avez-vous obtenu donc justement la garantie soit du NPD ou du Bloc québécois qui vont voter pour votre motion?
On va voir. On a eu des discussions avec les autres partis et on va examiner leurs enjeux. C'est pourquoi je vais proposer les amendements spécifiques sur le scandale, de démontrer notre intention. Ce n'est pas pour une élection, mais c'est pour les questions raisonnables.
And we'll now go to questions in the room.
Good morning. The Liberals seem to be implying that the term anti-corruption is expressing non-confidence in the government, that if you have a committee called an anti-corruption committee, that in and of itself is expressing non-confidence in the government. Can you respond to that, please?
We're changing the name. This is not about an election, as Mr. Trudeau would like. It's about reasonable questions that he has avoided through the use of prorogation, through the resignation of his finance minister, from hours of delay and obfuscation at committee. What are they really hiding from? So we're changing the name of the committee, and we're putting a specific amendment to say that this is not about an election. So we will see whether it's just more Liberal hiding or whether they're willing to answer questions.
Is the name the only main difference between what you were proposing and what the Liberals were proposing? And if not, what else is the difference there?
Well, the Liberals spent well over $300 billion in about 5 or 6 months. They would rather deliver 500 boxes full of spending documents and bog down Parliament for months rather than us bring in 3 boxes of the documents they've been avoiding to give us, or to remove the blacking out of documents to hide what they actually contain. So which is more reasonable? What the Liberals are trying to do, or our specific reasonable questions? I think Canadians see what's going on here. Threatening an election rather than being accountable for a Prime Minister who's already on his 3rd personal ethics investigation. It's time for some accountability, and we're going to bring that.
Mackenzie?
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. Mackenzie Gray with CTV News. You did a live stream with Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. You sat side by side. You didn't wear any masks. You said that it's going to be 4 months until you can get COVID again. Up until this point, public health advice has been that you should wear a mask or stay 6 feet apart from someone. Health Canada advice says that we don't know the period of immunity that you have. Do you regret not wearing a mask with Premier Kenney?
Thanks, Mackenzie, for the question. And it's important to reiterate to Canadians that we should all follow social distancing, mask usage, sanitation, all the measures during the pandemic, particularly with the second wave. And I have done so in every province I've been in. And in fact, I use my own experience with COVID-19 and that of our family to make sure that people are vigilant. So I respect those rules in every province I'm in, including in Alberta.
Okay, so you're respecting the rules, but you're still sitting beside the Premier of the province. You were running to be Prime Minister. Your party got very upset with Prime Minister Trudeau when he crossed over to Quebec earlier in the pandemic, saying that he broke the rules. Seems quite clear to me that the rules are that you should be wearing a mask or staying 6 feet apart. Again, do you regret not following the rules in this case and showing to Canadians that you're taking this as seriously as other leaders have been?
Well, Mackenzie, we were distant as we sat away from one another at a webcast event where everyone broadcasting this webcast, because there was no gathering, it was taped and webcast on the internet, and we were distanced. And coming up to the stage and leaving, we had a mask. Much like I'm doing now with you, you're not in a mask, I'm not in a mask. There's times you take your mask off and put it back on. That's what we followed that day in Alberta, and I want to commend the UCP for running probably, I think, the first very large-scale virtual political convention. And they did that out of the need to be responsible, and we will be.
Marika?
Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Mr. O'Toole, do you and your party have confidence in this government?
Well, that's a great question, because confidence can sometimes trigger an election. But confidence is actually inherent in the role I have as opposition leader. When a month ago I asked the Prime Minister to de-escalate the situation in Nova Scotia, he and the Minister did nothing. And I don't have confidence in how they're proceeding on that file, which is why we're asking questions. We are asking questions about the accountability of taxpayer dollars in the course of a pandemic and with insider friends getting access. We don't have confidence on how that was handled. But does that lack of confidence in a file or a committee work translate into the need for an election? No. We have an obligation, constitutional obligation, to ask questions and to hold the government to account. Mr. Trudeau has already used prorogation. They're using obfuscation and delay at committee. They're using resignation of ministers to avoid accountability. If he now wants to trigger an election, the Liberal Party would rather send people to the polls during the second wave of a pandemic than answer a few reasonable questions. I think Canadians should be concerned by that.
Okay, so you do have confidence in the overall government is what I take from that answer. On another issue, you were very critical.
Well, let me correct you there, because confidence in the parliamentary sense usually means a confidence vote leading to the defeat of the government. There has never, to our research...
That's not what I asked you, though.
You just said I have confidence in the government. I do not. Do I want to have a general election? I do not want that either. But we are not going to allow Mr. Trudeau to continue to play games using prorogation, using hiding and people reading, nursery rhymes and other things into the record rather than answering questions. Canadians should wonder why he's willing to do all this rather than just release a few documents. So confidence in the parliamentary term means a vote that can trigger an election. We're not going to let Mr. Trudeau suggest that our reasonable questions about a spending scandal mean we want to force a general election.
Okay. And you were critical of the Ontario government's response, saying that Alberta has had a stronger response to the pandemic compared to other provinces, including your own. What specifically do you think that the provincial government has gotten wrong?
Well, my comments were not about what provinces got wrong. My comments were being positive on Mr. Kenney. So Alberta has had a tracing app, for example, long before any other province, long before the federal government, which still does not have a functioning national tracing app. The premiers, all premiers, including Premier Kenney, Premier Legault, Premier Ford, Premier Horgan, have all had to step up to a higher degree because the federal government was late on the border for the first wave of the pandemic. The federal government has not fulfilled the promises Mr. Trudeau made in March for rapid testing, for tracing. They've failed on both measures. We don't have the rollout of rapid tests. So the premiers have had to be nimble and have had to respond even quicker because of the absence of federal leadership. And where some provinces have done things even faster than one another, we should have lessons learned so that for the second wave, we can learn from the first.
Last question, dernière question. David?
Hi, good morning, Mr. O'Toole. David Thurton, CBC News. So just to be clear, what amendments are you willing to make? How are you willing to meet the other parties halfway this special committee?
Thank you for the question, David. We've been speaking to the NDP about a different name for the committee. That seems reasonable to us, so we're going to propose an amendment. We're speaking to the other parties about the mandate of the committee, and I think that's reasonable as well. Right now, we have several officers of Parliament, from the Ethics Commissioner to the Languages Commissioner, studying things related to we. We've got several committees wanting to study things related to we that are being blocked by the Liberals. So let's take all of those questions to one, specialized committee of a name that we all agree on that will examine all questions related to the we insider scandal. And I think it's reasonable. We hope that the amendment we're going to add stating that creation of a committee is not grounds for a general election will also show the government that the opposition parties don't want them to play games. We just want them to answer questions.
Okay. I just wanted to ask you a question about the situation that's happening in southwest Nova Scotia. Yesterday we heard from Minister Mark Miller, the Minister of Indigenous Services, that the police basically let down the community, the Indigenous community there. Do you agree with those comments?
Minister Miller's government has let down Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And in fact, we've been raising this countless times over the last number of months. I spoke to the Prime Minister personally about it. I spoke to Chief Bellegarde personally about this concern. And for them to be bringing an emergency debate on their own failure of leadership should concern Canadians. And one thing that has united all voices in this area of the country that's frustrated right now, Indigenous leaders, commercial fishers and union leaders, they've all been disappointed with the response of the federal government. The Liberal Premier McNeil, has been disappointed with the lack of response of the Liberal government. So we're going to continue to ask for the government to show an ability to get tensions down, a mediated discussion on how we can fulfill the constitutional safeguard of Indigenous fishery, alongside the ability for rural communities in Nova Scotia to find balance for a way of life. I know it can be done. Leadership is hard. The Liberal government prefers photo ops than actual action. So I'd ask Minister Miller to get working.
Première question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, M. Trudeau. J'aimerais revenir à cette question de la motion conservatrice pour créer un comité anticorruption. Votre leader en Chambre, Pablo Rodriguez, vient de nous dire que vous ne voulez pas d'élection, mais on doit se poser la question, est-ce qu'on peut le croire? M. Rodriguez dit que le comité paralyserait le gouvernement, mais pour arriver à cette conclusion, il prend pour acquis que l'opposition convoquerait les ministres, vous convoquerait 5 jours par semaine, 5 heures par jour. Vraiment, est-ce qu'on peut vraiment penser qu'ils feront ça devant une telle exagération? Comment ne peut-on pas conclure que, dans le fond, vous voulez aller en élection parce que les sondages sont bons pour vous?
Nous ne voulons pas d'élection. Hier, il y a eu 2400 nouveaux cas de COVID-19. En tant que gouvernement, nous restons concentrés sur la santé des gens, la santé de notre économie. Nous allons continuer de faire tout ce qu'on peut faire, tout ce qu'on doit faire pour aider les Canadiens. On veut aussi faire fonctionner le Parlement. C'est pourquoi on a proposé un comité spécial qui va pouvoir regarder toutes les dépenses, tous les investissements qu'on a faits dans les gens depuis les débuts de cette pandémie. Et tous les partis d'opposition vont pouvoir avoir tout l'espace qu'ils vont vouloir pour regarder ces dépenses-là. Mais les conservateurs ont choisi d'avancer une motion qui établit clairement qu'ils n'ont plus confiance dans ce gouvernement. Alors, les partis d'opposition vont devoir avoir un choix à faire. Est-ce qu'ils vont continuer de faire fonctionner ce Parlement minoritaire? Ou est-ce qu'ils ont perdu dans ce gouvernement, perdu confiance dans le gouvernement? C'est leur choix. Yesterday, there were 2,400 cases, new cases of COVID-19. Our government is going to remain focused on helping Canadians fight this health pandemic and fight this economic crisis. As we've done from the beginning, we're going to do everything we can to help Canadians through this. We proposed a special committee, an extraordinary measure, so that parliamentarians can dig into all the spending that this government has put forward in exceptional circumstances to help Canadians through this COVID crisis. The Conservatives put forward a motion that clearly outlines their lack of confidence in the government. The opposition is going to have to decide whether they want to make this minority parliament work or whether they have lost confidence in the government.
Oui, alors vous dites que c'est le choix de l'opposition, mais c'est aussi votre choix d'en faire une motion de confiance. Mais j'aimerais savoir, est-ce que vous avez offert quelque chose au NPD pour qu'il vous sorte de l'impasse et ne fasse pas passer cette motion? Merci.
On a proposé un comité exceptionnel qui aura comme but de scruter toutes les dépenses de ce gouvernement que le Parlement a autorisées et que le gouvernement a fait dans ces temps de COVID. Je pense que c'est important que les Canadiens aient confiance dans leur démocratie, aussi confiance dans leurs institutions. Et c'est pour ça qu'on est ouvert à créer ce comité spécial qui permettra justement aux députés de tous les partis de scruter attentivement toutes les dépenses, tous les investissements qu'on a faits pour contrer la COVID-19, pour contrer cette crise économique. C'est une proposition raisonnable, exceptionnelle, et on espère que les partis d'opposition vont voir qu'on veut réellement faire fonctionner ce Parlement et on veut qu'ils puissent faire leur travail. We put forward an exceptional measure for a special committee of Parliament that would have as a mandate to examine all the spending, all the investments we made in Canadians through this COVID crisis. We have rolled out unprecedented measures to support Canadians, to support small businesses, to support families, to support communities right across the country. And we feel that parliamentarians should, in this exceptional time, have an ability to look very carefully at all that spending, and that's why we're proposing this special committee. But it will be up to parliamentarians and the opposition to decide whether they want to make this minority parliament work or whether they've lost confidence in this government's ability to manage this pandemic and continue to govern this country during this crisis.
Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Before we continue, we please ask journalists to keep their questions to ministers and the medical team once the Prime Minister has left the room. Avant de poursuivre, nous demandons aux journalistes de bien garder leurs questions pour les ministres et l'équipe médicale lorsque le Premier ministre aura quitté la pièce. Next question, Christy Kirkup, the Globe and Mail. Line open.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. What specific steps did your Fisheries Minister and her department take in the weeks leading up to the escalation of violence in Nova Scotia?
From the very beginning of the concerns that have been expressed over the past weeks, our ministers, not just the Fisheries Minister, but Minister of Indigenous Services and Minister of Indigenous Relations, as well as Public Safety, have been engaged in the issue of Indigenous fishery in Nova Scotia, and very aware of questions being raised across the country in coastal communities. We've taken this issue extremely seriously. It is important that we keep Canadians protected and safe as we move forward to respect and uphold rights that have been long recognized for Indigenous fishers.
Follow-up, Christy?
And just as a follow-up, Prime Minister, 21 years after the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in Marshall, why are there still fault lines, to use the words of one of your ministers?
First of all, over the past 21 years, many different governments have moved forward on granting licenses to Indigenous communities, on ensuring that there is progress being made. Indeed, Minister LeBlanc, when he was Fisheries Minister, moved forward on significant initiatives as well. We recognize there is a need to continue to accelerate and to end this question by fully recognizing the rights of Indigenous fishers to a moderate livelihood and ensure that that is fully in place. This is the work we're doing right now. It is not easy work. It is not quick work. It is work that needs to be done properly, respectfully, and in partnership with everyone involved in a nation-to-nation relationship and bringing along the commercial fishery community as well. That is the work that we are doing right now.
Merci. Prochaine question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous.
Merci. Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Concrètement, pouvez-vous nous préciser ce qui arriverait si la motion visant la création du comité sur We Charity, elle est adoptée? Est-ce que ça veut dire qu'automatiquement, vous allez voir la gouverneure générale pour lui demander la dissolution du Parlement?
Si le Parlement détermine qu'ils n'ont plus confiance dans ce gouvernement, malheureusement, ça va vouloir dire effectivement des élections. Mais je sais que tous les Canadiens veulent qu'on continue à rester focusé sur eux, sur cette réalité qu'on a actuellement près de 22 000 cas actifs de la COVID-19 à travers le pays. On fait face à une crise sanitaire, à une crise économique, et ce gouvernement va rester concentré sur la réponse à cette crise, va rester concentré sur l'aide qu'on envoie aux Canadiens. Ça va être aux partis d'opposition de décider s'ils veulent continuer à faire fonctionner ce Parlement, s'ils veulent accepter un comité spécial que nous offrons de créer pour regarder toutes ces dépenses par rapport à la COVID-19, ou si, comme les conservateurs, ils ont perdu confiance dans ce gouvernement. We know that if Parliament determines that they no longer have confidence in the government, in a minority parliament, unfortunately, there would be elections. But we also know nobody wants elections. People want to continue to have their government focused on helping them in their jobs, helping them in this health crisis, and that's what we will continue to concentrate on. We've offered to create a committee that will allow parliamentarians to dig into all COVID spending in these exceptional times. And we hope that opposition parties will decide that they want to make Parliament continue to work for Canadians and not side with the Conservatives who've decided that they no longer have confidence in this government, as Leader O'Toole said this morning.
Mélanie, un suivi?
Oui, concrètement, ce que ça veut dire, en fait, M. Trudeau, c'est que vous êtes en train de dire aux Canadiens que vous préférez...
Vous avez coupé, Mélanie. Êtes-vous sur mute?
Oui. One moment, please. Un moment, s'il vous plaît. À vous la parole, Mme Marquis.
Oui. Vous m'entendez?
Là, on vous entend.
OK, parfait. Comment expliquez-vous aux Canadiens que vous pourriez les envoyer en élection juste parce que vous refusez la création de comités qui veut enquêter sur We Charity, qui a embarrassé votre gouvernement, qui continue de l'embarrasser?
On est un gouvernement qui a un Parlement minoritaire. Ça veut dire que le gouvernement ne peut gouverner que si on a la confiance des partis d'opposition. Les conservateurs ont mis de l'avant une motion qui clairement souligne qu'ils ont perdu la confiance dans ce gouvernement avec leurs propos, et M. O'Toole l'a confirmé ce matin. Et je pense que c'est aux partis d'opposition de décider si eux aussi ils ont perdu confiance dans ce gouvernement ou non. Mais nous, en tant que gouvernement, nous allons rester concentrés sur la COVID-19, sur le travail que nous faisons pour les Canadiens, tout en essayant de faire fonctionner ce Parlement, en proposant un comité qui va avoir pour mandat de regarder toutes les dépenses et les investissements faits pendant la COVID-19 par ce gouvernement.
La première question est de Émilie Bergeron, agence QMI. À vous la parole, votre ligne est ouverte. Your line is open.
Oui, bonjour. D'abord, juste une petite précision par rapport à la motion conservatrice. Bon, vous avez dit que vous l'appuyez, mais vous appuyez aussi l'initiative d'un comité sur les dépenses, comme, dans le fond, vous voulez les deux, c'est bien ça?
Ben, l'un n'exclut évidemment pas l'autre. Allez fouiller, parce que je précisais un peu plus tôt que ce sont deux choses distinctes. Donc, allez fouiller dans la teneur spécifique de comment ça s'est passé pour We Charity, alors que le gouvernement veut tellement pas qu'on aille là qu'à l'époque, il avait prorogé, puis là, il fait tout pour essayer de nuire à cette démarche, c'est pertinent. Mais bien connaître et bien maîtriser ce qui a été fait et ce qui est engagé en matière de dépenses pour lutter contre la COVID-19 me semble aussi très pertinent. Mon enjeu sur ça est bien précis. Le gouvernement a dépensé beaucoup. Est-ce qu'il a dépensé bien? C'est une autre question.
Et en suivi, vous vous attendez à quoi du côté du NPD pour ce qui est de toute la notion de vote de confiance? Et est-ce que, selon vous, les chances que le gouvernement soit défait, il y a vraiment un risque réel?
Quand vient le temps pour le Bloc québécois de prendre une décision comme celle-là, on essaie de ne pas le faire en termes de pur calcul partisan. Est-ce que c'est bon pour le Québec, on est pour? Est-ce que c'est pas bon pour le Québec, on est contre? Dans le cas présent, la clarté sur We Charity, c'est bon pour le Québec, on vote avec les conservateurs. Les conservateurs ont essayé de diluer leur propre motion, ils ont essayé de rentrer dans leur propre motion le fait que non, ça ne veut pas dire qu'il faut faire tomber le gouvernement. Puis... Donc, on n'est pas leur motivation, mais ils ne peuvent pas voter contre leur propre motion, bien qu'il peut y en avoir quelques-uns qui auraient un soudain mal de ventre. Et le NPD, c'est pas clair parce qu'ils ont développé une expertise particulière pour dénoncer, vilipender le gouvernement avant de voter avec le gouvernement. Ils sont assez imprévisibles et semblent se donner du temps pour réfléchir, ce qui n'est jamais une mauvaise chose. J'ai bien de la misère à lire la possibilité. Maintenant, on sait que le gouvernement a des démangeaisons. Il aimerait ça pouvoir aller en élection sans que ce soit de sa faute. Donc, il faudrait qu'on l'ait fait tomber. Mais il n'y a personne au Québec qui est assez naïf pour imaginer que ce n'est pas une manœuvre du gouvernement pour ne pas être responsable lui-même si jamais il y a élection.
Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions de la salle. Sylviana, is there any question in the room?
I'm Mr. Blanchet, Mackenzie Gray with CTV. I know you touched on it in French quite extensively, but I'd just like to get in English your opinion on the Conservative Day motion. And do you think we're headed to an election at this point in time?
I still doubt that the government would be irresponsible enough or lightheaded enough to precipitate Quebec and Canada into an election. But they sure feel the temptation. They just do not want to be responsible for it. They want to provoke, challenge, force the Parliament to remove its confidence, its trust in favor of the government to be in elections without being responsible for it, which nobody will believe, of course. The proposition, the motion of the Conservatives is by itself something to be favored. It says that we have to come back and shed light on the whole We Charity thing. The government wanted so much to have none of it that he closed the Parliament in August. And when we came back, we believed that there was a speech of the throne which would propose something new, interesting, convincing about this fight against COVID-19, and there was none of it. It was simply and exclusively a strategy to stop those discussions and inquiries into the We Charity thing, which is only one of many severe defaults in terms of ethics from this government.
Despite the fact that everybody says nobody wants an election right now, but we're in a position where there very well could be an election if no one is willing to move or budge. So is the Bloc willing to work with the Liberals or potentially the other parties to change the situation to try and avoid an election?
I would be tempted to say that we are always open to discuss with people, but, when somebody says something and feels another one but doesn't want to admit it, it's hard to work. The Liberals seem to be tempted by the idea of an election for some strategic reasons which belong to them. We do not fear such an opportunity because we are absolutely ready to go if need be. But we are not the ones that have this as a consideration. If what is proposed is good for Quebec, we will go with it. If what is proposed is bad for Quebec, we will go against it. The proposition of coming back to know the whole truth about the We Charity issue is good for Quebec as well as for Canada. So we will vote in favor of it. And if there are consequences, the Liberals will have only themselves to blame. The Canadians and the Quebecers are judges that the Liberals cannot appoint as they wish.
We'll now go back to the phone. Nous allons maintenant retourner au téléphone. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Hélène Bizetti, Le Devoir. Please go ahead, your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Bonjour, Monsieur Blanchet. Je comprends donc que vous, la perspective d'une élection ne vous fait pas flancher, mais en fait, tout le monde semble présumer que si cette motion passait donc et que M. Trudeau allait voir la gouverneure générale, que le gouvernement serait dissous et qu'on irait en élection. Mais il existe quand même une autre option, celle que la gouverneure générale se dise une élection, c'est peut-être pas le meilleur moyen. Pourquoi ne demandons-nous pas à un autre parti d'essayer de former un gouvernement pour ne pas aller aux urnes? Dans un tel cas, est-ce que vous seriez à l'aise à cette perspective qu'on, par exemple, demande aux conservateurs de voir s'ils sont capables de faire un gouvernement de remplacement?
Ça impliquerait une forme de coalition dans laquelle le NPD et les conservateurs formeraient ensemble un gouvernement. Je ne veux pas être dans la cafétéria le midi. Et si, dans votre raisonnement, ça impliquerait que le Bloc québécois participe à un gouvernement canadien, vous comprendrez qu'à sa face même, ça n'a pas de bon sens. Nous sommes un parti indépendantiste. Nous allons en faveur de ce qui est bon pour le Québec, même si c'est voté dans un Parlement fédéral, et nous allons contre ce qui est mauvais pour le Québec, ce qui est souvent voté dans un Parlement fédéral, mais nous ne participerons à aucune forme de gouvernement de coalition.
OK. Donc, pour vous, si cette motion passe et comme le gouvernement le dit, c'est un vote de confiance, on doit donc aller en élection. Pour vous, est-ce qu'il y a un moyen d'éviter ça? Est-ce qu'on pourrait contester l'interprétation que fait le gouvernement de cette motion et donc de permettre qu'elle soit à la fois adoptée et qu'on n'aille pas en élection?
J'ai déjà entendu parler de procédures qui permettaient ça, mais malheureusement, je n'ai pas l'expertise que ça prend pour développer. Mais oui, il est possible parfois d'avoir des votes qui ne mettent pas en cause la responsabilité du gouvernement. Je comprends par contre que le gouvernement peut mettre dans le contexte actuel sa propre responsabilité en cause. La confiance en cause, c'est son intention. Et là, c'est soit dans le shotgun un bluff, vous n'êtes pas game de nous faire tomber parce que vous allez prendre le blâme, ou vous allez nous faire tomber, on va dire que c'est de votre faute, puis on va être peut-être bien content d'aller en élection pour un ensemble de considérations stratégiques qui leur appartiennent. Le Bloc québécois, sur le territoire québécois, je pense, a agi pour démontrer qu'il était à la fois très fier de son mandat au bénéfice des Québécois et très fiable dans la gestion des dossiers auxquels on est confronté.
We'll take another question in the room before going back to the phone.
Hello, bonjour, David Thurton, CBC News. So just to be clear, you will be supporting the opposition, the Conservatives' motion. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you could respond to the Prime Minister today. He says that they are offering a special committee to study pandemic spending. Is that not enough?
Those are two completely different things. Studying the expenses which have been made by the government fighting COVID-19 is one quite relevant thing, because we need to know if the government has spent a lot or has spent well, which are two quite different things. But one must not include into that analysis the whole We Charity thing. First, because there was not that much expenses in that. It did not happen. And second, it is an ethic issue. And this ethic issue cannot be hidden behind something else because the government doesn't want to hear about it.
So you will be supporting the Conservative Party's motion?
Yes.
Yes, you will. Okay, just wanted to make that 100%.
Actually, my friend Réal here had proposed something quite similar a few weeks ago.
Okay.
The idea of having one big committee. We discussed this. But now the Conservatives come forward with it, and now the idea belongs to the Parliament, which will dispose of it, and we will be in favor of that.
And just quickly, I don't think we've heard you very much on the situation that's happening in southwestern Nova Scotia. If you wanted to say anything to that, and particularly in response, if you had anything to say about what the minister had to say about how the police reacted, and how the commercial fishers.
You told me if I want to say anything, you are offering me temptation not to want. However, there's something quite important to be said about that, wherever we're from. Whenever violence or verbal violence, vocal violence or intimidation is never a solution to any issue. But if anywhere such things happen, It is because there is no room for good-fated discussion between the Aboriginal nations and the Canadian government, no place in which all the parties would feel comfortable or in which they would invest their trust. This is the reason why some things like that happened. It should have been discussed and solved a long time ago. And it seems a bit easy for the government or for the Minister Miller to simply say that the RCMP is somehow responsible for the situation. I think a government should never say that somebody of whom it is responsible has failed, because a failure of the RCMP is somehow a failure of this government.
Hi, Mr. Singh, Mackenzie Gray from CTV News. Are you going to support the Conservative motion, yes or no? And can you give your rationale why? And if you are not going to give an answer on yes or no, can you explain if you are negotiating with the Liberals right now to get something in exchange for avoiding an election? Is that on the table as well?
I think it's very clear that there are negotiations about what this committee looks like. And there are 3 ideas out there. We put out our solution. Conservatives have put out their solution. The Liberals have put out their solution. But let's be very clear. We are very close. There is a lot of common ground. We want to know what's happened with spending during this pandemic. We want to know what the Prime Minister and the Liberal government have done. And there's a lot of unanswered questions that we want to see those answers. And we're going to continue to fight for that. But when we have all proposed solutions and we're so close, what's become more and more clear to me is that the Prime Minister is not looking for a solution here. The Prime Minister is looking for an excuse to go to an election. And I will not give the Prime Minister an excuse to go to an election. I'm going to be very clear. I will not give him an excuse. He is not going to be able to hide behind the opposition. If the Prime Minister wants an election, he should have the courage to go tell Canadians who are worried about their lives, worried about the future, worried about their jobs, that, hey, I'm going to put this country through an election because I'm worried about a committee. The Prime Minister needs to explain that to Canadians.
Every politician I've talked to today, and I've talked to every leader, has made it very clear that they don't want an election. But the fact of the matter is, if you join the Bloc and the Conservatives tomorrow and vote for the Conservative Opposition Day motion, we're headed to an election. So I'll give you another opportunity. Is the NDP going to vote for or against the motion?
As leader, I've said this to Canadians again and again. I am not interested in posturing to find a way to put our country into an election. I am all about fighting for you, and I'm going to make sure you get help, you get the support you need, and I'm going to fight for you to get that help. It seems to me, though, that the Prime Minister is looking for an excuse. So if there is an election, it is going to be because the Prime Minister has found a way to do it. And what he should do is just come out and tell people, hey, I want an election. Like, why is he beating around, and why is he beating around the bush? Why is he trying to use excuses? If he wants an election, he should just go out and say it. I don't, because Canadians don't. They want help, and I'm here for you, and I'm going to fight for you.
We're getting back to the phone before coming back to the room. Please, operator, do we have a next question?
Our next question is from Ryan Tumulty from National Post. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sir, I'm not sure that we've heard a clear answer from you on the Conservative motion. So can we stick to that, and can you tell us, would your party support that motion as it is written? Do you think there are any issues with that Conservative motion?
I can tell you we're working on a solution, because we've always been providing that kind of leadership throughout this pandemic, that our goal is, like, let's get to a solution here. All 3 parties have put forward a proposal which effectively have a lot of common ground. Committees struck to look at the spending in the pandemic and to get to the bottom of the WE scandal and other potential scandals that this government's involved in. With the goal, in my part, is to make sure this government doesn't do that and instead helps people that are in need. And so I will not be allowing the Prime Minister, I will not let the Prime Minister use this discussion over committee as an excuse to go to an election. Like, there is no way that the Prime Minister, I don't understand how he can justify going to people and saying, I've plunged this country into an election over an opposition day motion about a committee. Like, how would the Prime Minister justify that? I will not be any part of this farce that this prime minister is suggesting that this is what's important. What's important is the people who are worried about their jobs. What's important is people who are afraid for the future. That's what's important here, not trying to posture to get an election over a committee. Like, that is stupid, to be blunt.
Yeah, sir, the other three party leaders have made very clear where they stand on this motion that's coming tomorrow. They've made clear that the Liberals have made clear that they view it as a confidence vote. Why can't you give us a clear answer on how you'll vote on it tomorrow?
Because I want to make it really clear. You know, the Liberals are trying to set this up as if this makes sense. Like, this makes no sense. When would ever any government think that an opposition day motion and a discussion around committees is in any way justifiable to risk an election over? Like, that's the question here. How does a prime minister think that this is what we should be spending our time on? How does a prime minister think that when people are out there worried, like the people I've spoke to are worried and afraid, how does he think he's going to go to those folks and say, yeah, we're in an election right now because of a committee where I was in disagreement over the number of people that sat on it? Like, that is ludicrous. So no, I'm not going to be a part of that. I'm not going to be a part of giving the prime minister an excuse. If he wants to run it, if he wants to have an election, let's be clear. Like, the question is there going to be an election or not? If there's an election, it's going to be because of Prime Minister Trudeau. It's not going to be because of me.
And one last question in the room, David.
Hello, good to see you. David Aiken, Global News.
Other leaders, I haven't seen you in real life.
I know. I came out of the basement.
Holy
I'm
moly.
very excited to see everybody here. It's really, really neat. Other leaders
You
have been
broke
asked
the spell a bit there.
Yes. Other leaders have been asked this question today. Do you have confidence in the government?
I take that question very seriously. And I want to say we have confidence in our ability throughout this pandemic to have fought for help for Canadians. And we've been able to fight and win. It's less that we've thought that this Liberal government would do it on their own. No, in many cases, they were not. They were actually on their own prepared to cut the help to people in the midst of a second wave. They were going to cut the help to people. So no, I don't have confidence in that decision. But I have confidence in our team that fought back and stopped them from doing that, and also won paid sick leave for Canadians, which is the first of its kind at the federal level in the history of our country. So throughout this pandemic, what's happened is we have been fighting for people and winning for people, and I have confidence in our ability to keep on fighting and doing that.
You've had some discussions with the Prime Minister, or your House leaders, discussion with other House leaders over time to do just that. Say, listen, you do this, and you can expect the NDP to vote in favor of your program. Is there anything left undone? In other words, if the Prime Minister does call an election, would he be betraying any commitments that you believe he might have made to you and to Canadians about things that he was still going to deliver? Anything still on the table that will be undone if he does, in fact, decide to call an election?
Absolutely. One of the major things he promised to us, committed to us, was help to people living with disabilities. Canadians living with disabilities have been ignored throughout this pandemic, have been neglected, and we fought to get them some help. And initially, the Liberal proposal was only going to cover a very small percentage. We fought to expand it. It's still not good enough, but it's something. But even that amount has still not been delivered. There is no excuse for that. So there's many examples where the Liberal government has made commitments and not followed through. But we fought, and we have won significant gains for people. The fact that we're CERB in the first place, the wage subsidy at 75%, getting help out to seniors, getting help out to students. We've been able to win some significant victories for people, and we're going to continue to fight for those things.
I want to allow one more question on the phone and one more question in the room. Operator, do we have a next question?
Merci. La prochaine question est de Émilie Bergeron de l'agence QMI. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour, M. Singh.
Bonjour.
Tout à l'heure, en anglais, vous avez dit que vous travaillez sur une solution pour la création d'un comité. À quel point vous êtes confiant que vous allez arriver à une solution satisfaisante pour vous, pour le NPD?
J'apprécie cette question parce que si c'était dans mes mains seulement, j'ai complètement confiance qu'on peut trouver une solution parce que c'est tellement similaire à ce qu'on a proposé. Notre proposition, celui des conservateurs et celui des libéraux sont tellement proches. Ça reste seulement une question des nombres des députés et qui va être le président ou la présidente. Donc, On est tellement prêt. On est tellement proche. Mais ce qui est clair maintenant, c'est, dans mon avis, le premier ministre Trudeau et le gouvernement libéral vraiment ne veulent pas trouver une solution. Donc, on est prêt. On est tellement proche. On peut réaliser une solution entre ces trois options. C'est simple. Mais la question, c'est vraiment si le gouvernement libéral veut trouver une solution. Et dans mon avis, il me semble de plus en plus que non. Peut-être il ne veut pas trouver une solution. Et tout ça, c'est une façade de cacher leurs vraies intentions, ce qui est de plonger le pays dans une élection. Et je ne veux pas être un parti de ça. J'étais toujours clair. Je veux continuer d'aider les gens.
Un suivi?
OK. Oui. Bon, depuis tout à l'heure, là, la plupart des questions sont les mêmes. C'est comment vous allez voter demain. Il y a peut-être possiblement des Canadiens là, qui regardent ce point de presse-là en ce moment puis qui se demandent est-ce qu'il va y avoir, oui ou non, des élections. Ça revient à vous, puisque les partis d'opposition ont déjà dit comment ils allaient voter. Alors, offrir un peu de clarté aux Canadiens qui regardent en ce moment et qui se demandent s'il va y avoir une élection, oui ou non.
Je regarde directement aux gens parce que ça, c'est une question tellement importante. Je regarde directement aux gens et je dis, je ne vais pas donner une excuse au Premier ministre pour plonger le pays dans une élection. Le Premier ministre veut créer une question de qui va plonger le pays dans une élection. La réponse est claire. Le Premier ministre, c'est lui qui a décidé de créer un vote de confiance. Ce n'était pas un vote de confiance. C'est lui qui a décidé de faire ça. C'est bizarre de faire ça avec une motion d'opposition. C'est plus bizarre de faire ça à cause d'une comité. Vraiment, le Premier ministre du Canada essaie maintenant de plonger le pays dans une élection en pleine deuxième vague à cause d'une comité. Ça, c'est le Premier ministre. Et je suis tellement clair et je vais continuer d'être clair. Mon but, c'est jamais de plonger ce pays dans une élection. Pendant une pandémie, mon but, c'est d'aider les gens. Et je vais continuer de faire ça. Mais jamais penser que ce n'est pas une question que le Premier ministre a créée de forcer une élection. C'est eux qui ont forcé cette situation. Pas moi, pas les oppositions. C'est le Premier ministre.
A last question in the room.
Hi, I'm curious. You keep saying that you're not going to play a part in the farce, I believe, ludicrous farce, the very many words that you used. But with all due respect, you have to play a part. Your party's going to be called on to vote on this motion. So are you saying you're going to abstain? Your party's not going to vote on the motion? Is that how you are not going to play a part? Can you be a bit more clear on what you mean, I am not going to play a part?
Well, the Prime Minister is trying to create a question here. And the question itself is bizarre. He's trying to make people believe that going to an election, that he's trying to find a way to go to an election over an opposition day motion about a committee. Like, how crazy does that sound? It is crazy. And imagine the Prime Minister trying to explain to people who are worried about their livelihoods, worried about their future, worried about whether they're going to have a job or not, worried if they're going to be able to pay the bills. His reason is because he doesn't like a committee. It is entirely the Prime Minister that has set this up. It is not on anyone else. And if the Prime Minister is just looking, grasping at straws to find an excuse to go to an election, he should just tell people, hey, I'm looking to go to an election. Because this is not a reason to go to an election. There is no justification that the structure of a committee would be the reason to go to an election. Like, how would he explain that to people? And that's why I'm trying to flip the question. It is not about the opposition here. Like, it is ludicrous that a government would say an opposition day motion on holding them to account is somehow a confidence motion. Like, the whole job of opposition is to hold the government to account. That's normal. So effectively, the Prime Minister is taking something normal and saying, okay, I'm going to take a normal thing and turn it into a confidence vote. The question is not whether the opposition wants an election. The question is whether the Prime Minister wants one. And the answer looks like he does. And let's not hide behind this farce of a committee as the reason for it. The Prime Minister has some sort of self-serving reason for this and is setting up a question that he is the only one that's setting up. And the answer is what he wants, looks clear, is an election. I don't want one. I'm very clear. I'm not trying to find a way to go to an election. I'm not trying to find a way to strategize and prioritize myself or my party. I've been very clear. Our entire goal in this pandemic has been how do we help people? How do we fight for people? How do we get help to students? How do we get help to people who are living with disabilities? How do we help those families that are worried about their future? That is what we're focused on. Prime Minister Trudeau is trying to create an excuse to go to an election. We're not about that.
And the Liberals have also said that seems to be that the two biggest concerns they have about the proposed motion from the Conservatives is the makeup of the committee, how many opposition MPs versus government MPs, and also that the Prime Minister or any minister could theoretically be called at any time to testify for hours at a time, and that this would distract them and prevent them from actually responding to the pandemic. Is the NDP willing to move on either of those two asks or negotiate with the government on those two specific things to prevent an election, essentially?
Well, and I want to make it clear, it's not actually on us to prevent the election. Like, the Prime Minister is setting this up because he wants an election. Like, there's no other way around it. Like, the Prime Minister is setting this up for an election. Because, to your point, we've already put it out there. We have a solution. Vote on a chair, have the committee be made up with the same percentage that the government has in terms of power. They're a minority government, so they should have a minority of members. And there should be an elected chair. It should not be a Liberal chair that's chairing a committee to oversee the accountability of the Liberal government. We've seen what's happened. The chair has been complicit in delaying tactics, in not allowing information to come forward. So no, I mean, that's something that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, we're absolutely willing to negotiate. And that's why I said in the beginning, we've put 3 ideas forward. If you look at the ideas between the Liberal, Conservative, and ours, they're very close. There's just some minor tweaks, and we can easily get to a solution. And so I would be normally hopeful that there was a solution. But it looks to me that the Liberal government and Prime Minister Trudeau aren't looking for a solution. They're not genuinely trying to find a solution here because it's easy to find one. We could easily compromise and find a solution that would still hold the Liberal government to account, hold the Prime Minister to account, get the documents we need easily. But it doesn't look like the Prime Minister is looking for that. It looks like the Prime Minister is trying to find a way to force an election, but he wants to blame the opposition. He should have the courage to explain to Canadians why he wants an election.
And this is all the time we have. Thank you very much. This concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
Merci. Thank you very much.